Actually, it wasn't online. Of course, the internet wasn't really going by then. It was just about starting. But it was offline, but it was by distance. It was by distance. I used to get all the stuff by post, yeah, through the post, and had to do it all. But I worked from home, yeah. So in July 1998, there was an advertisement for a job in the Australian. By the way, that was a newspaper I used to read with pride in those days. That was before it became the right wing conservative rag that it now is. And I wouldn't be seen dead with it in my house at the moment. Anyway, the advertisement said English teachers needed for oil company in Abu Dhabi, top dollar. Well, I applied and heard nothing for a week or two. So I phoned the agent for the oil company who placed the ad, and a very friendly and garrulous Yorkshireman assured me that I was very well qualified for the job and that I was almost certain to get it. Did I know of any other friends who were interested? Because there were 24 positions on offer. Well, this sort of sales talk I wasn't used to in the education sector. We didn't do that. It was not polite to sell yourself. But of course, this was the ESL industry and business jargon, newspeak, Orwellian newspeak. So everything was marketing. And I was probably, anyway, it had the desired effect. I became quite excited. I thought it was too good to be true. And I was indeed right. Weeks went by, even months, and several phone calls later until I became convinced that my married status and family had once again scuppered my chances. The Yorkshireman couldn't understand it, but I could. He thought the company would have been very keen. However, I'd been there and done that, as the Aussies say. Companies prefer single people because they have to pay less than for candidates with families, because of schools, etc. It's more expensive for the companies. Anyway, we gave up hope about November and had a very depressing Christmas. It was the new millennium Christmas. I remember watching the millennium celebrations with feelings close to despair. Then on Boxing Day, there was a phone call from Abu Dhabi. A man with a Middle Eastern accent, who was actually Jordanian, asked me if I was still interested in the job with the oil company. Because it was Boxing Day, I had taken a glass of wine and I was generally in a merry mood. So, yes, I told him, of course, I was still interested. Then he said he would like to interview me. And then he said, would now be a convenient time. Well, I was a little taken aback by this. I was still not used to the unprofessionalism of the ESL industry. No planning, no advance warning of anything. But I had little choice but to agree. There followed a very brief, merry interview on the telephone, another farce, which ended in him asking me if I would like to come to Abu Dhabi for further interview. Is the Pope a Catholic? I felt like saying to him, of course. Since the company were paying, I said, yes, indeed. I could hardly contain my excitement. The only slight hitch was that he wanted me to go on Monday. That was in 3 days' time, and I was due to start my course for my doctoral thesis induction at Queensland University of Technology on the Monday. There followed 24 hours of intense excitement, which was terminated by an unexpected phone call from our man in Jordan saying that the interview had to be postponed for a week. This actually suited me because it allowed me to attend the university course and still go to Abu Dhabi. Win-win. A few days later, I remember driving with my family to the airport in Bluey, our 1982 Falcon, and wondering if this was really going to be our final and much anticipated escape from Australia. Maria was so excited. The flight to Singapore was uneventful. Although on the way from Singapore to Dubai, I had a very mild asthma attack caused by the wool of the beautiful woolen blankets courtesy of Singapore Airlines. I arrived in Dubai with a blocked nose, not an uncommon occurrence for me by any means. Not to worry, any discomfort I might have felt was soon to be removed by my VIP treatment on my arrival in Dubai. A chauffeur-driven car whisked me away from Dubai to Abu Dhabi, where I checked in at about 7 o'clock in the evening. My evening was spent swatting for my interview the next day, but I was informed on my arrival that I would have to do a medical in the morning, which would last a long time. I was really quite surprised at the length of the medical. Several hours, they said. Anyway, next morning at 7, I went down to the hotel reception and I noticed another mature-looking man, and he was sitting there, and I thought, yeah, maybe he's going for interview also. So I started a conversation with him, and sure enough, he was going for interview. I think his name was Marvin. Anyway, Marvin and I were taken away by the driver to the oil company where we started our medical examination. Wow, what a performance. I had never been through such a medical before. Every conceivable test was carried out. I kept meeting Marvin in a different room. Either he was coming into my room or he was going out of a room, or vice versa, and both of us were usually in a state of undress. It was hilarious, and the medical lasted almost 4 hours. Most of it was okay, but I was a little bit worried by the respiratory tests. The Romanian doctor asked me to blow into a tube to test my powers of respiration. It was really quite an intricate procedure. My first efforts produced an instant paper graph, which seemed to worry my Romanian friend. He said, "Not good." So I did it again, and he didn't look much happier, but he allowed me to continue with the other tests. By the end of the medical, Marvin and I were worried individuals, and we wondered what was going to happen next. What really made us laugh was the fact that people kept asking us during these medical procedures where we wanted to go, as if we had any idea. We, of course, had not eaten because of this medical test, and about 1 o'clock we were then informed that we were going to be taken straight to the interview. Nothing then happened for about an hour, and we simply sat hungry and waited. And then at around 2 o'clock, the Jordanian man who'd interviewed me on the phone arrived, and he invited Mervyn in first. Mervyn was accompanied by a local UAE Arab. After about 45 minutes, Marvin appeared, smiling and happy. I was then called in and asked exactly the same questions that I'd been asked on the telephone in Brisbane. Yet another farcical interview. It was weird. It was clear to me that, in fact, the whole process was just a formality, as there were no questions of substance. When I tried to ask some really important questions like, could I see the accommodation? What about the schools? Could I see the classrooms maybe and the resources? The man from Jordan became quite irritated, as if he wanted to finish the interview quickly. He was shuffling all his papers and all his body language was saying, "It's too late for all this, let's go home." I definitely had the impression that he didn't want to answer all these questions. I should have smelled a rat at that stage, of course, but as usual, I was desperate for the job, so I didn't ask any more questions. How many times in my career have I made that same mistake? At least a dozen, I'd say. Anyway, Marvin and I went back to the hotel. We had a great evening. I went to the bar and I remember watching cricket in the bar. I felt pretty elated, as I was confident I had got the job. Next morning, I was just leaving the hotel on my way to get a taxi when the phone rang. Guess who it was? It was the chief doctor from the oil company, and he wanted me to come back for further tests. Well, I was devastated. I immediately began to panic, of course, and my thoughts went back to the breathing test, and I was pretty sure that there must have been some problem with this test. So the driver came again, took me back to the doctor. This chief doctor was a Sudanese. And like everyone else in Abu Dhabi, when he first met me, he asked me what I wanted. I said, "Well, you sent me for me, doctor. You said there was some problem with my tests yesterday." He looked at me quizzically over his glasses. "Who are you?" he said. I said, "I'm Nixon, Donald Nixon." "Oh," he said, "no, it's Smith I want to see. There's a problem with Smith's tests." Well, I was so relieved. "You mean I can go?" He looked at my file and said, "I haven't got the blood test, but everything else appears to be in order." Well, I could have hugged him. On cloud nine again I was, driven back to my hotel room, where a taxi took me to stay with my friends for the night in Dubai. Then, on May the 9th, the year 2000, I had a pleasant stay with them, discussing the prospect of our imminent relocation to Abu Dhabi because I was confident that I'd got the job. I returned to Australia and gave Maria the good news. After a couple of days, I sent an email to the Yorkshireman in Perth just to ask him to see if he could get some information about how the interview had gone. He contacted his agent in Abu Dhabi and he told me he had received word that I had been selected. But they hadn't yet received the results of the medical. Well, we were overjoyed, to put it mildly. 10 days passed, and eventually I emailed him again just to make sure that everything was confirmed and that the results of the medical had been okay. The next day I received an email from the Yorkshireman in which he said he was sorry to say that the results of the medical had shown that I was unfit for employment and that it was company policy not to give the reasons. Well, we were devastated, shattered, stunned, shocked. I just couldn't believe it. It seemed like the whole world was against us, that there was a conspiracy of a divine nature. What had we done to deserve this? I couldn't really speak about it much for a few days. I went to my doctor and had a total checkup. He said I was fine and that if I had taken inhalers before the test, I would have passed the test. The interview was in January, and somehow or other, I don't know, we managed to pick ourselves up and start again from where we had left off. Work at embassy got worse and worse. The new director of studies was appalling, and I knew I couldn't last for much longer. I had thought of Brunei many times before because we had friends who'd been there, but I'd been put off by the mixed reports they'd given me about the schools and the teaching there. They had told me that the teaching wasn't good. Lifestyle and conditions were excellent, but the teaching wasn't great. For this reason, I had rejected the idea again and again in my mind, because I knew myself well. If I became unhappy at a school, the job wouldn't last, and I couldn't risk going to a place and then returning after a short period. Not again, not any longer, not with the family at this critical stage. Roger was coming towards the end of his high schooling at St. Paul's in Brisbane, so this would not be a good time to have major disruptions. But I suppose it was desperation in the end. I decided to apply for Brunei on the internet. I actually had to make a written application to London, and the whole process was handled from there and took quite a long time, from January to March. Then, in April,